Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. I used to work as a cleaning employee at an elegant motel in Washington, D.C. in the mid-1990s. My name is Sail, and I am a refugee from Vietnam. Although I barely spoke English, I was one of the most dedicated workers there. Everyone appreciated me because I was kind and put my heart into what I did. The motel staff trusted me completely, and even the guests left me small notes thanking me for keeping their rooms spotless. I worked long shifts and almost never complained, aware that my life there was much better than the one I had left behind in my homeland. One day, a mysterious guest arrived at the motel. He introduced himself as Mr. Martin and rented the most expensive suite located on the top floor. That room was enormous, with a panoramic view of the entire city, and only the wealthiest clients could afford it. I was assigned the task of keeping that suite clean, but I soon discovered that Mr. Martin did not want anyone to enter. Every time I knocked on the door, he would politely respond that it wasn't necessary. He always smiled and greeted the staff kindly, but there was something about him that made me uneasy. He stayed there for more than a month, and during all that time, no one, except him, entered that room. The Do Not Disturb sign hung constantly on the door, almost like a warning, and I never insisted. Then one day, Mr. Martin disappeared. The sign was no longer there, and there was no trace of him anywhere in the motel. We thought he had left early, without asking for help and without wanting to draw attention. However, when the front desk staff checked the records, they found nothing. No one remembered seeing him leave, and his name did not appear on the list of guests who had checked out. It was as if the earth had swallowed him. The motel manager was baffled, but since Mr. Martin had paid in advance with a credit card, they decided not to make a scandal. They asked me to clean the suite. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door, with an inner feeling warning me that I should turn around. But I was a professional, and I had a job to do. As soon as I crossed the threshold, an unbearable stench hit me. It was thick, nauseating, as if something were rotting. I covered my nose and my eyes watered as I looked at the disaster in front of me. The room that had once been luxurious was in chaos, as if a wild party had been held there. The furniture was overturned, the floor littered with empty bottles, and the bed was unmade, with the sheets tangled and stained. But the worst thing was that smell. It seemed to be coming from the closet, whose door was slightly ajar. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached, each step heavier than the last. The air was thicker, and the smell unbearable. When I opened the door, I noticed a cardboard box among the scattered clothes and shoes. It looked out of place, as if someone had left it there in a hurry. My hands were trembling as I reached for it. I knew, with a certainty that froze my soul, that what I would find inside would be something I could never forget. The box was light, but the smell became unbearable. I lifted the lid, and a piercing scream escaped my throat. I dropped the box and stumbled backward. Inside was a large lock of hair, dirty, matted, and stained with dried blood. The sight made me turn my head and lose my breath. I felt that I had to run, to escape that cursed place. My heart pounded my chest so hard I thought it would burst out. I ran toward the door, but my legs barely responded. I reached the elevator, shaking so much I could barely press the button. When the doors closed, I leaned against the wall trying to breathe, but the smell was still there, and the image of that bloodied hair would not leave me. It was etched into my mind. Everything went dark before the elevator reached the lobby. I woke up surrounded by people, motel staff, paramedics, and police. The place had become a crime scene. Officers were going in and out of the suite, taking photographs and collecting evidence. They tried to question me, but I was too shocked to speak. Later, they informed me that Mr. Martin had used a fake identity and a stolen credit card. The victim was an adult film worker who had been missing for weeks. The hair inside the box belonged to her. It was only one piece of a much darker mystery. I never returned to that motel. I quit that very day. unable to face that horror again. That experience left me with a deep scar that stayed with me for the rest of my life. I could never forget the terror I felt, the smell or the image of that box. They haunted me in my dreams, reminding me that I might have escaped by a hair's breadth from something far worse than I could imagine. Before moving on to the next story, if this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell to receive the next horror stories. We appreciate your support. Share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. Story 2. The storm had been relentless for hours. Rain lashed violently against the windshield as I drove along Highway L, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. The wipers were running at full speed, barely managing to keep the visibility through the curtain of water. I was on a solo road trip, trying to get away from everything for a while, but the bad weather and an accident up ahead had delayed my journey far more than I expected. It was already past midnight and fatigue was starting to weigh on me when, in the distance, I spotted a flickering neon sign. I let out a sigh of relief. The sign said Sunset Motel, though the letter S was burnt out, making it read Unset Motel. I didn't care. All I needed was rest. I turned into the gravel parking lot, hearing the tires crunch under the rain. The motel was a single-story building, L-shaped, with a row of doors that opened directly to the outside. Each one showed peeling paint and blurred numbers. The rain made everything look even more rundown than it probably already was. The exterior lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows over the puddles on the ground. I grabbed my bag and walked to the small office at the end of the row. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and a bell rang above my head. The air smelled stale, a mix of mold and old cigarettes. Behind the counter was a man slumped in a chair. His face was gaunt, with sunken eyes that gave him a rodent-like look. Greasy hair fell over his forehead, and his thin lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Need a room?" he asked in a hoarse voice, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. "Yes," I replied, trying to ignore the feeling of unease crawling up my spine. "Just for one night." The man nodded and reached under the counter to pull out a key. His hand trembled slightly as he handed it to me. "Cash only," he said, locking his gaze on my face for a moment too long. I hesitated, but I didn't have many alternatives. "All right," I answered, pulling bills from my wallet. As I handed them over, I noticed how his fingers brushed mine a second longer than necessary, and a shiver ran through me. "Room 7, he indicated, pointing toward the row of doors. "You'll be fine there." I muttered a thank you and hurried out. The rain had eased up a little, but the wind was still blowing hard, slipping through the gaps in the old building. I found room 7 easily and opened the door. The smell hit me immediately. A sour, damp stench so strong it almost made me vomit. The room was small, with wallpaper peeling off and a stained carpet. The bedspread was threadbare, and when I turned on the light, I saw cockroaches scattering across the floor. Disgusted, I stepped back. There was no way I was staying there. The idea of lying on that filthy bed made my skin crawl. My car, though cramped, was clean and made me feel safer. I went back to the car, locked the doors, and reclined the seat as far as possible. It wasn't comfortable, but it was definitely better than that room. I must have fallen asleep for a while, because I was awakened by whispering voices. Groggy. I blinked several times until I remembered where I was. Then I saw them. The man from the front desk was standing right outside room 7, holding a flashlight. He was speaking quietly with another guy I hadn't seen before, taller, bulkier, with a hood covering his head. The receptionist put the key into the lock, and both of them went into the room. My heart lurched. What were they doing in there? I held my breath when I realized something terrible. They were looking for me. I watched them move around inside the room, checking everything. The bed, the closet, even under the mattress. They were searching for someone. They were searching for me. I felt the air drain from my chest. My first impulse was to start the engine and run, but the fear of making noise paralyzed me. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, praying they wouldn't notice the car parked just a few meters away. Minutes turned into an eternity. From my seat, I watched them rummage through my things, tossing my clothes onto the dirty floor. Then the taller man said something to the other, and both of them froze. They exchanged a look, closed the door, and walked out. The taller one scanned the parking lot with the flashlight, his eyes sweeping across the area, until they paused for an instant in my direction. I shrank into the seat, trying to make myself invisible. Finally, they turned away and walked back toward the office, their long, threatening shadows stretching under the flickering lights. I didn't move until they disappeared inside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I turned it as quietly as possible, and the engine purred to life. For a second, I thought the sound would make them come running out, but the office remained silent. I backed out slowly, leaving the parking lot without turning on my headlights until I was far enough away. My heart was pounding, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to get away from that place forever. The rain had stopped, but the night still felt heavy and oppressive. I drove for miles before daring to turn on the radio. I needed to hear anything that could drown out the echo of fear. When the first light of dawn began to show on the horizon, I found a small diner by the side of the road. I parked and went inside, looking for a bit of calm. I had no appetite, but I ordered a coffee and picked up an old newspaper someone had left on the counter. I was flipping through it absent-mindedly when a headline caught my attention. Local motel closed after investigation. The article detailed how the Sunset Motel had been shut down that very morning, shortly after my escape. It mentioned suspicious activities and the arrest of the owner for human trafficking and other crimes. A chill ran through my entire body as I read. I had escaped, without even knowing it, from something much worse than a dirty room. Story 3. I was driving back from a quiet farm where I had spent the night alone. That place had given me a sense of peace, surrounded by open fields, with the sound of the wind and the distant murmur of trees. The weather was cool, and the drive through the countryside was pleasant. Gentle hills stretched out in the distance, and now and then you could see a solitary farmhouse along the side of the road. I hadn't planned to make any stops, but the afternoon was starting to grow dark and I didn't want to drive all night. When the sky turned to shadows, I decided it would be better to look for a place to rest. That was when I saw a small, rundown motel on the side of the highway. The building looked old, as if it hadn't been renovated in decades. The paint on the walls was peeling off in large patches, and the neon sign flickered weakly, casting a gloomy glow over the empty parking lot. There were no other cars in sight. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether the place was still operating, but exhaustion outweighed my doubts. I pulled into the parking lot and parked in front of the office. The moment I stepped inside, I was wrapped in a smell of dampness and stale air. The atmosphere was musty, heavy. Behind the counter, an elderly man watched me with the dull eyes. He had gray hair and a distant, almost absent expression. He didn't say much. He simply handed me a key without asking any questions. I didn't speak either. I just wanted a bed and a few hours of sleep. My room was at the end of the building, in the most secluded part. As I walked down the exterior walkway, I noticed the absolute silence. No cars, no voices, no footsteps. Nothing. Only the distant rustle of wind moving through the trees. The door creaked as I opened it, and the sound seemed to echo in the stillness. The inside wasn't any more encouraging. A small room with faded wallpaper, an old bed, and an uneven mattress. A weak lamp cast a yellowish light that stretched long shadows across the walls. I thought about leaving, but sleep and exhaustion overtook me. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. The air felt heavy, as if the room hadn't been aired out in years. An uncomfortable sensation crept over me, though I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. I need to sleep, I told myself. That's all. Still, something didn't feel right. I lay down, but that uneasiness persisted, as if someone else were in the room with me. I opened my eyes and looked around. The shadows seemed to shift, to dance with the flicker of the lamp. I pulled the blanket over myself and tried not to think. I closed my eyes, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was as if the air itself were breathing around me. Then I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like fabric dragging across the floor. My eyes snapped open. I sat up in bed, scanning the room. At first, I didn't see anything, just the same depressing room. But then, in the corner, near the foot of the bed, something moved. It was a dark figure, hard to make out. My heart started pounding. I stayed frozen, hoping it was a trick of the light, but it wasn't. The shape became clearer. It looked like a hunched person, with their back to me. I couldn't see a face, only a black silhouette, motionless, too solid to be a product of my imagination. For a few seconds it remained still, then it slowly turned its head toward me. My stomach tightened. Where there should have been a face, there was only a dark void, an emptiness that froze my blood. A terrible cold seized me. I couldn't move or scream. Finally, I managed to react. I threw myself out of the bed, stumbling as I backed toward the door. The figure didn't move, but I didn't wait to find out what it would do. With trembling hands, I grabbed my bag and wrestled with the doorknob. The door flew open and I ran outside. The night air, cold and damp, hit my face, but I felt immense relief at being out. I sprinted to my car without looking back. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I sped out of the parking lot, not daring to turn on the headlights until I'd gotten several yards away. The road stretched dark in front of me, and my heart was still racing. I drove aimlessly, checking the rearview mirror over and over, convinced something might be following me. But there was nothing, only the empty road, and far behind, the reddish glow of the motel's sign fading into the distance. I don't know what I saw that night, but I knew I would never go back to that place. Whatever that thing was, that presence, it wasn't something I ever wanted to face again. The rest of the drive was a blur. I didn't stop until I reached a small town several miles ahead. I found a well-lit gas station and pulled in. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. Everything that had happened replayed in my mind like a bad dream. I tried to convince myself I had only imagined it, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. The image of that faceless figure standing at the foot of my bed stayed burned into my memory. I had made it out unharmed, yes, but the memory of that night would follow me forever.